Hello, my name is Edwin Rutsch, and I'm the director of the Empathy Center located here in beautiful Santa Barbara, California. The center's mission is to build the empathy movement and to raise the level of empathy in society through education and community building initiatives.
And my name is Anita Nowak. I teach at McGill University, and I'm the author of Purposeful Empathy, a book that invites readers to turn up the volume of empathy in their lives.
And at the beginning of 2024, Anita and I co-hosted the Empathy Summit, brought to you by the Empathy Center, and more than 40 authors of books about empathy participated.
They shared what their book was about, why they were motivated to write it, and what they hope readers will take away. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope you'll buy their book. It is now my pleasure to introduce Michael Ventura, who is an entrepreneur, advisor, speaker, and thought leader whose work on the topic of empathy has been embraced by Fortune 500 companies, including Google, Goldman Sachs, IBM, Microsoft, and Nike, as well as academic institutions like Princeton and West Point, and the public sector through his work with the Obama administration and the UN. He is the author of Applied Empathy, The New Language of Leadership. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Anita. It's great to be here with all of you, and what a pleasure to just share some time with such wonderful colleagues and people who care about this topic. I'd like to begin maybe by just saying that the world has been a particularly complex place in the last few months, maybe more so for others than it has been in a while, and this is a good time to be talking about empathy. And so I know there's been a lot of listening in the sessions this morning. I'd like to invite you, if you're willing, to kind of shift into a little bit more of a cognitive space, which is a great segue from the last conversation. And I'd like to ask you a question. And feel free to use the chat. You can also just keep this private and to yourself. But I'd like to ask you to think about someone you presently want to understand better. That might be someone you actually know. That might be someone or a group of people that you're having a hard time understanding. Politics domestically and abroad are very ripe for that question. So take a moment and think about who that person might be. And I'd like you to kind of hold them in your head as we go through this a bit. I'd like you to also think about what seems to be preventing you from having an accurate understanding of them today. What stands in the way of that? Asking that sort of question under that, where does that come from? What could you try to do to understand them better? What behavior change within yourself might open up a space for greater understanding? And in effect, this sort of active exploration is what was the inspiration for me to develop the methods I've documented in Applied Empathy. As Anita said, my name is Michael Ventura. I've been an entrepreneur, author, and educator for over 20 years. And my career started as an entrepreneur building an agency, which became a consultancy in New York City called Sub Rosa. And Sub Rosa, in our early days, was an organization that got called in to help organizations in moments of transformation and change. Sometimes those were positive. We've raised some capital. We're growing fast. Sometimes they were problematic or traumatic. We've had a scandal, we've had an executive leave, we've had bad culture for years, we've never been able to address it. And so our work kind of sat in between internal culture change and organizational design and external brand and communications. And the reason why that work sat in the middle is because ultimately people want the brand and the business to be known for something out in the world. But if it's not true internally, it will never hold water externally. Like the quick anecdote I've had years ago was a client told us, we want to be known as the most innovative player in our category. And so our first question was, well, are you? And they said, oh no, we're far from it, but we want everyone to think that. And I said, well, that's probably the wrong place to start. Let's go back a little bit and think about how we can make you a more innovative culture that gets it a little more embedded into the organization as it is today. And then people will start to believe it over time. But that's sort of the tendency with marketing and communications folks, is to sort of put on blast what they hope they'll be and hope the organization catches up. And so finding the way to dance between those internal and external constituent groups is really a valuable part of this work. And so how did Applied Empathy come to be? Well, when we were sitting in our office and talking with my colleagues about briefs that would come in the door, I noticed, began to build a tendency for shutting the doors and saying, we have the right answer. And we weren't doing enough getting out of the room, getting out of the building, talking to people. And when we went and did that, our work was always made better. And so what I realized was this was a skill that wasn't uniformly embodied in everyone on our team. And so we needed to create a practice for ourselves to skill up new hires, to skill up existing people in our organization so that they could go do this better. And so that was how Applied Empathy was born. It was really in order to train our own team. And in order to do that and do that well, we thought an academic partner would be helpful, a place where we could field test some of this, where we could actually learn in an academic environment. And so we partnered with Princeton, and we taught 3 semesters at Princeton University that became the foundation of what Applied Empathy's methods are sort of grounded in. And during the course of those 3 semesters, the work was going well, our work with clients was improving, all of that stuff was happening nicely. And then we got a phone call from the United States Military Academy at West Point. And they said, we like what you're doing at Princeton, and we'd like to see if it also works for soldiers in the military. And so this was a perfect test for us to see if we could take what worked at an academic institution like Princeton and translate it to a very different academic environment at West Point. And the headline was, it worked. It worked exactly the same way. We didn't change any of the material, and we realized we were onto something. And that's what led us to writing the book and putting it out into the world. And it was really primarily written for leaders. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. Leaders do well with objectives and tasks, with skills development, with quantifiable goals. And all types of empathy don't necessarily lend themselves to that sort of behavior, but cognitive empathy does. And a series of mindsets and behavior changes and tactics that can help someone limber up their empathy muscles and make them more deft and capable. That was really the goal of this work. It was give someone a playbook to start to get more comfortable in that cognitive empathy space as a leader, as a collaborator. And when they do, their ability to connect with each other, to understand their consumers, to understand the competition or the competitive landscape, to understand their board or their shareholders better, increases across the board. And it's not just for companies that are, potentially more enlightened cultures. I've done this with big 5 banks. I've done this with very bureaucratic institutions. And this is a teachable skill that everyone gets benefits from. And so the book is really designed to help offer those lessons and those tools in a toolkit approach, not necessarily a linear approach. Everything in that book will not work for you personally, but pieces of it will. And those ones that do, you can embody and you can practice and you can move with over time and let them become part of your own toolkit. I know we're sort of in these little 10-minute windows jamming a lot in, but I'd like you to go back to that audience that you were thinking about earlier, that person or that group of people that you'd like to understand better. And I'd like you to think about, is there a question, if you just had one singular question you could ask that person to try to understand them better, what would it be? I'm going to give you maybe 20, 30 seconds. If anyone would like to share that question in the chat, please feel free to do so. It's great to see how other people think about these things. What are you afraid of? Thanks, Lynn. It's a great one. The reason why I ask this is because the skill of inquiry, of question asking, of going in and getting under the surface of that thing is ultimately a skill that we can all practice and practice better every day. And one of the hacks I give some of the organizations I work with is find the little things you do every day that you've somaticized into this behavior that's not really interested anymore. Everyone wants to be interesting. Very few people want to be interested. I actually think being interested is more interesting. And so if you can start to find ways to be more interested, and this is a perfect example we all know too well after the last few years, you've all joined Zoom calls where you're waiting for someone to be the last one to jump in. And so you're sitting there chatting with your colleagues and you say, hi, Anita, how are you today? And Anita gives you the same answer she's given 5 times because she's been asked 5 times. So she goes to that place in her brain where she's got that answer and gives it back. Change those little questions. Be more interested. And the one on that one that I like is, what's it like to be Anita today? Same benign curiosity. I promise you, you will get a more interesting answer every time. So check those little behaviors in yourself and see what little tweaks on the dial you can make to get to a different place.
1 minute.
The world's complex. It's going to remain complex. It potentially may get more complex in the years ahead. And I am probably the first to say, like, empathy is not the answer, but it can bring us closer to the answers that we're searching for. And so I hope this work and this practice kind of sparks something in you. And if it does, I'm always happy to chat more. Track me down at michaelventura.co. and or LinkedIn or social media or any of the other things. I'm relatively findable. And I appreciate being invited in today. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Michael, especially since you're getting over a cold. So we appreciate you being here.